Talk Show. Recorded live.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Travis and Vic's Drunken Horror Adventures. Vic, I almost screwed it up. I was thinking about saying Indie Power Rankings.
Don't do that, man. This is the horror show, and we're going to talk about one of my good friends, Al Capone.
Yeah, tell you what, man. We're talking 86 years and a day since the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago, Illinois. We had the north side versus the south side, and for people who don't know much about it, we're going to try to school some people on it tonight. You know, Ray Johnson, the history cop, will come on to talk about it. There's been some recent news about this case. Cook County, yeah?
I just want to let you know, we do have Blake on the line now. So, Blake, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
What's up, Blake?
Well, hey, how you guys doing? Sorry I was running late. I had to finish the X-Files. Didn't finish it the past 2 weeks. I have an addiction.
Yeah, I was watching it too. So anyway, I was getting into, it's been 86 years and a day since the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Back in the news, I understand.
It is, and Ray Johnson's going to talk about that. He wrote a whole article about his kind of opinion on the fact that they're like talking about, hey, we have this in our storage, and it's like, no shit you do, but he'll get into that. And yeah, it's always interesting to kind of revisit these crimes from the past. And, you know, guys, we usually do, you know, like a serial killer every month, but I mean, when you talk about a notorious murder, I mean, this one, it ranks right up there all time as one of the most notorious that ever happened. I mean, at the time, people were just kind of letting the Chicago mob fly under the radar and do whatever the hell they wanted in Chicago, but this was the thing that really kind of made people aware of how violent things had gotten there.
Absolutely. I mean, check it out. Frank Gusenberg. I mean, that story in itself is made for a discussion. Shot 14 times, still lives for 2-3 hours, and refuses to reveal who shot him. That's the damnedest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, there's a couple different stories about what he actually said, and, you know, because there's some people that say he said the cops did it, which is kind of technically true because supposedly these guys were dressed as cops. And then the other story is that he just wouldn't tell anybody. So, you know, I'm not sure which is true. I mean, because there's a lot of stories going around, and we can only sift through so much. But, you know, it's just really interesting to think that this guy, he gets blown away, he's barely alive, and he still really didn't shine much light on who did it. You know,
I think that's something that's happened a lot. If you look up Albert Anastasia, or, you know, any of the Gambinos, a lot of this thing still think, you know, same thing happens. I mean, your family members will wipe your ass out, and you won't tell anybody. You'll die with that secret in your mouth. I guess it's just the loyalty, you know, for La Cosa Nostra, you know, this little business of ours, little thing of ours, you know. I mean, it's wild.
Out of curiosity, Blake, have you seen any of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre movies?
Not the recent one that's been out, but of course I saw back when A&E was still around, and, you know, History Channel and some of those things. I saw some of the others. I went to the library this weekend and tried to look for a book on it, and surprisingly, my library, as well stocked as it is, has no books or documentaries about it. But I did check out an awesome one on serial killers. It's an encyclopedia of like 400 pages of serial killers. So, but
you know, it's really interesting because for it to be one of the most notorious crimes in history, it almost seems so cut and dry where most people are pretty sure that, of course, Al Capone's gang were responsible, that there's not a whole lot of debate out there. But I will say that there are a couple of people who've written alternate stories about what actually happened and who may have been responsible. There's one guy, and I can't think of his name offhand, excuse me for that, but who says, you know, who tries to make the argument that it was the police, that this was, you know, some sort of underground thing, that they were paid off or something. I don't buy any of that personally, but, you know, people have their theories. That's kind of how it goes. I mean, we talked about John Wayne Gacy probably a year ago now, or close to that, or about half a year ago, and, you know, there's people out there that still believe he didn't work alone. So, I mean, there's always going to be, I'll say, crackpot theories about, you know, things that seem obvious.
Well, there was a great theory of Bolton came out in 1935. Byron Bolton, he was basically a former Navy machine gunner, and he was an associate of Egan's Rats, who obviously were, supposed to be involved in all that. And he said he took part in it with a few others, Getz, Fred Burke, and all these others, and he just kept saying that, there were so many people involved, and it's weird to me, guys, because 7 people died, and that's all. I mean, grand scheme of things, the Manson murders had all these others, there were so many scores of other crimes with more people, but I think it was because at that time, that was right before Judge Crater went missing. That was right about the time of the corrupt Tammany Hall, thing with politics and how everything was, everybody in government was involved with the mob in some form or other. And I think it was just because of, it was a product of its time, because of what was going on in the environment around it. That's what made it so notorious, because body count-wise, not that impressive for this particular crime. 7 people, that's slight weight by Ridgway standards, or, by Gacy standards or by any of the others, or Mirez, it's very light. But I think it's because of what was going on around it, with Prohibition and, people trying to keep their organized crime going by putting up fronts and dog tracks and all this other stuff. And it's just a lot of ego going on there between different gangs. So I think that's what it was at the time, it made it so notorious.
Yeah, and before Ray gets on, I guess we'll kind of set it up. And speaking of the time, of course, one of the big things that led to many of the mobs and many of the mob profits and many of the conflicts is the fact that, we had the Prohibition going on. This is not long after Prohibition started. You had these gangs on opposite ends of Chicago. You had the North Side and the South Side, who are both profiting. And there's always this territorial divide here where, they feel like one's moving in on the other. And there's a whole big backstory behind it. And I will tell you, for anybody that's really interested in this, to get a good backstory, you can go on YouTube and just look up the St. Valentine State Massacre. The first thing that you'll usually find is a documentary by the History Channel, narrated by Paul Sorvino. Really good stuff. But, at the heart of this whole thing is, of course, Al Capone. And I believe the South Side, and that's the Italian gang that was led by him. And then you had Bugs Moran, who was leading the North Side Irish gang. But the funny thing about Bugs Moran is he didn't really work his way into the spot. He kind of fell into the spot after Capone's gang kind of worked their way through killing each leader of that gang.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
But it's just really interesting how, it kind of came to a head right here. Now, obviously, this wasn't the end of it, but this is the thing, I guess, in its own way, it was kind of the climax of everything. Because, despite the fact that they could never pin it to Al Capone and they wanted to, that really kind of signaled the FBI and everybody else to kind of keep an eye on him and his organized crime. And, as Vic and I were talking about off air, and most people, that are familiar with Al Capone know, he was never busted for things like this. They couldn't catch him for anything but tax evasion.
Absolutely. And something else, I don't know if you gentlemen, I'm sure you have done your homework, but I thought it was interesting, speaking of Capone and his ability to get in and out of shit at will, two of the prime suspects of the massacre were John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, and both were, worked with Capone really closely, but the two of them and Joseph Buena ended up being found dead in Indiana on May 8th of 29, and gangland lore has it that Al Capone knew they were going to betray him, to talk about what his involvement was, and he produced a baseball bat, beat the trio to death. That's the big rumor at a dinner party of all places.
Well, before we get further into that, I believe we have Ray Johnson on. What's up, Ray?
Hey, how you doing?
Well, we're just happy to be here. It's our usual monthly kind of edition of this. This is the third time you've joined us. We always love having you on, and this is a little different than our other two. We talked about Gacy once, and we talked about Holmes once, and of course It is crime, but this is of kind of the organized crime nature, and we're talking about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 86 years and a day now it's been since that took place in your
happy
fair
birthday,
city
by
there.
the way.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
It's your birthday show.
Yep, exactly. And at first I was like, I'll stick around for a few minutes. And I was like, hell with it. It's my birthday. I want to stay on. So, I'm sitting here with the beer, just happy to be here. And
I am happy that you are, because I'm tired of hosting them by myself. The past 3, I've done myself. Get up off your ass and do something. How you doing, Ray? This is Blake. How are you, man?
I'm doing good.
Well, Ray, we were kind of setting things up as, basically the part I set up is that, a big part of the mob was the Prohibition era, and a lot of the setup between the north and the south side of Chicago gangs was, that and the territory and all those things, and it ends up being Al Capone versus Bugs Moran, the gangs, and Bugs Moran kind of fell into that position. But I'll tell you what, in your own way, kind of set the scene for me for February 14th, 1929. How we get to this point.
Well, there was, obviously you had it was during Prohibition. You had the gang wars, like you said, going on, the beer wars between Moran and Capone, along with all the other stuff going on. I mean, they all had clubs and whatnot, but mainly the booze type of stuff. Now, they think, and of course, nothing's ever been proven. So most of this is just conjecture and exactly what happened prior and who's actually responsible. Even though there's been a couple people that admitted things here and there, the only one ever charged, I think, was Jack McGurn, and he got off. So no one's actually gone to prison, as far as I'm aware of, for the killing. But basically. From what I understand, there's a number of reasons. The most popular reason is that Jack McGurn had been attacked the previous year. Machine Gun Jack McGurn, who was one of the individuals that the Chicago cops eventually decided was responsible. That he was attacked, I believe, right outside of a restaurant about a year before. So part of the reason they think may have been retaliation for that particular event. I think it was probably a lot more than that. It just doesn't seem like, McGurn was a hitman. He also owned the Green Mill nightclub. So he had a lot of stuff going on, but it wouldn't be the first time that a hitman had ever been attacked in retaliation. So for something this big, it had to be something pretty monumental, and of course they always knew that Capone was probably behind it. Of course, he was conveniently in Miami at the time, so he kind of had an alibi as far as being directly involved. He wasn't carrying any guns or on the scene, but so anyway, it was the morning of February 14th, and the part of the North Side gang was congregating over at the SMC Cartage Company over at 2122 North Clark. And, to them it was just a normal day. I think that, pretty much what they were carting was booze. So you had the trucks in there, and they would wait for the trucks and fill them up and start transporting stuff. Now, the 7 of them were there. The plan was to kill Bugs Moran. That was the ultimate goal, was to take out Moran, which obviously wasn't successful. But so the plan was they actually, part of the story that we get piecemeal after the fact is that there were, from what we understand, 2 lookouts across the street. There's actually a pizza place in the building where the lookouts were. It was more of a boarding house, and they did find letters and receipts and stuff in the boarding house. So they're pretty sure that was an actual part of the plan. They had 2 lookouts across the street who were watching to see who showed up at the cartage company, waiting for Moran to show up. Only they kind of screwed up because Albert Weinshank, who was one of the guys killed at the cartage company, looked like Moran. So when he went into the place, that's when they kind of gave the go-ahead. Now the interesting thing, and I thought this was a pretty brilliant plan actually, because these guys were all congregated in the back. I guess you'd call it the west. They were all on the inside in the back, where the trucks were, and you had Albert Ketchelak, who was also known as James Clark. He was kind of like Moran's second in command. Then you had Adam Hare, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He was a bookkeeper. Then you had Albert Weinshank, who ran some cleaning businesses and whatnot. They had some laundry businesses and dry cleaning businesses that he ran for Moran. Then you had the brothers,